Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, was set to attend an event celebrating his national achievements. However, upon arrival, a surprise security guard unexpectedly stopped him at the entrance. What could have become a public issue transformed into a memorable moment that deeply moved the crowd and amazed social media users. His next actions demonstrated true leadership to the world. It was a hot Tuesday afternoon in Ouagadougou, and the streets were lively. Flags of Burkina Faso waved, and children wore t-shirts proclaiming our hero, Ibrahim Traoré. This was a special day of honor, celebrating President Traoré's success in bringing peace, helping the poor, and restoring dignity to his people. Thousands of people had gathered at the National Civic Arena. Suddenly, a black, unmarked Toyota arrived at the VIP entrance. A single security officer raised his hand and firmly stepped forward, saying, "Excuse me, sir, I can't let you in without a badge." Inside the car, President Ibrahim Traoré paused. He had arrived without an escort or sirens, as was his usual quiet custom. President Traoré calmly stated, "I am Ibrahim Traoré." The guard looked puzzled and nervously chuckled, replying, "No, sir, the president doesn't come like this." People nearby started to notice and pointed their phone cameras. The president did not become angry or call for help. He simply remained still. Then, he did something completely unexpected that would soon astound both the crowd and people online. Instead of showing identification or insisting on entering, President Traoré smiled. He then slowly moved away from the entrance and began to walk. He walked along the side of the building, passing confused vendors, surprised guards, and whispering journalists who wondered if it was truly him. His aides attempted to intervene and explain, but he stopped them with a simple hand gesture, softly saying, "No, let the people see me this way." A barefoot child holding roasted corn ran up to him and shouted, "President, why are you outside?" Traoré knelt to the child's eye level and replied that the day was not about him, but about all of them. A grandmother behind a fence started to cry as Traoré continued walking around the back of the arena. More people began to follow him. There was no security, no stage, just the president and the ordinary people. He arrived at a small side gate where the guards immediately recognized him and stood to attention. However, Traoré raised a finger, telling them, "Please don't open the gate. I want to enter like everyone else." Inside the arena, the master of ceremonies was preparing to announce his entrance, unaware that the true event was already happening outside. Inside the crowded arena, the organizers appeared worried. The president was significantly late, and his special handmade seat at the front remained empty under a spotlight. People quietly wondered where he was. Meanwhile, outside, Traoré stood in line with regular citizens. No one was asked to make way for him. He waited calmly beside a farmer and two schoolboys. The farmer, not recognizing him, asked, "You're here for the event?" Traoré nodded and replied that he hoped to learn something. The farmer chuckled, saying he felt the same way and that people considered the president a good man. Traoré smiled once more. When President Traoré finally entered the arena, not through the VIP gate, but through the public entrance, a collective gasp went through the crowd. Children stopped eating, and old women placed their hands on their hearts. Some even began to cry. The music stopped, and all eyes turned towards him. He had no guards or grand display, just a dust-stained white shirt and sandals. A profound silence fell over the arena, so deep it seemed as if the world held its breath. Then, the crowd slowly rose to their feet, one by one, not clapping, but showing deep respect. An old man then shouted, "He walks with us because he is one of us." The arena was filled with emotion, but the most memorable part was yet to unfold. Back at the VIP gate, the young security officer stood completely still. Someone had just whispered to him, "That was the president." The guard's eyes widened and his mouth dropped open. As he looked at the entrance list, which had no picture or clear instructions, he realized he had just been doing his job, but now he felt a surge of panic. His chest tightened and his knees weakened. People started filming him, some mocking while others laughed. Suddenly, a firm hand touched his shoulder. He turned to find it was President Traoré, who had somehow come back. President Traoré spoke soft, telling the guard, "No one should blame you. You did what was right. You followed the rules. Burkina Faso needs men like you." The guard's lips trembled. President Traoré then genuinely embraced him in public, with cameras watching. That single hug quickly became a sensation online. Within hours, hashtags like "Humble President" and "Guard of Honor" started trending. Meanwhile, inside the arena, something even more remarkable was about to occur. President Traoré was preparing to go on stage, but he wasn't bringing any notes. Instead, he was carrying something raw, deeply meaningful, and heartbreaking. When he stepped onto the stage, he had nothing but a single, folded photograph in his hand. The cheers faded, and a profound silence filled the arena. He looked at the vast crowd, seeing thousands of faces, young and old, mothers holding babies, students, soldiers, and farmers. Then, he held up the photograph. It was an old, faded image showing a small boy in torn sandals standing in front of a broken mud house. Traoré declared, "This was me." Gasps spread through the audience. He paused, allowing the silence to settle over everyone. He explained that he was not born in a palace or raised with power. Pointing to the photo, he described that on the day it was taken, he had only one meal and drank from a broken plastic bottle. His voice faltered as he said, "But someone believed in me. My mother, my teachers, my neighbors. Burkina Faso believed in me." A woman in the audience began to sob, followed by others. He continued by stating that no titles would ever separate him from his origins. He emphasized, "I am not your leader because I am above you. I am your leader because I walk with you." The entire arena rose to its feet, not to cheer, but overcome with tears. Behind the stage stood a specially made chair for the president. It was carved from rare wood, polished for weeks, and embroidered with gold thread, meant to honor Traoré and symbolize the nation's love. However, even as applause grew, the chair remained empty. Traoré stood before it, looked at it, and shook his head. He then slowly walked past it and instead sat on a simple wooden bench, typically used by the cleaning staff. The audience was stunned. Someone whispered, "What is he doing?" A little girl in the front row asked her mother, "Why won't he sit in his chair?" Her mother, wiping away tears, replied, "Because his heart is bigger than that chair." Traoré looked at the ushers, stage workers, and volunteers around him, nodding at each one. He softly stated, "I'm not here to be served. I'm here to serve." This powerful moment was captured on camera and quickly spread, going viral across news outlets like BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and social media platforms like Facebook and TikTok. Everyone was asking, is this the most humble president in the world? Yet, an even more profound event was about to unfold that would deeply impact the nation and the world. As Traoré sat quietly on the workers' bench, murmurs spread through the crowd. "Did you see what he did? I've never seen a president sit there. Is he okay?" Then, a soft, trembling voice emerged from the second row. It belonged to Awa Sanu, a 70-year-old retired midwife from Bobo Dioulasso. She slowly stood, using a wooden cane, and asked the organizers if she could speak. They initially hesitated, but Traoré raised his hand, gesturing for her to be allowed to speak, and simply said, "Let her." A microphone was given to Awa, and the arena became silent once more. She looked directly at the president, her voice trembling as she said, "You don't know me, but years ago, when rebels burned my clinic and my husband was killed, you came." President Traoré's eyes widened. Awa reminded him that he was only a soldier then, not the president, but he had carried her daughter 5 miles to safety. People gasped and cameras zoomed in as Traoré appeared stunned. Awa continued, stating, "And today, you showed the world again. You don't need a title to be great. You just need a heart." The crowd erupted in sobs. However, Awa had something else in her bag that would deeply move everyone. Awa slowly reached into her worn handbag and pulled out a small white cloth, carefully wrapped in a plastic sleeve. It looked old and faded, but under the arena's bright lights, a brownish red stain across its middle became visible. Holding it up with trembling hands, she explained, "This was the cloth you wrapped my daughter's foot in when she was bleeding." President Traoré slowly stood, his face pale. Awa continued, tears flowing, that she never threw it away, not because it was clean, but because it had saved her daughter's life. The crowd was silent. Even the camera crew put down their equipment to wipe their eyes. Awa walked forward and gently placed the small cloth into the president's hands. He immediately knelt before her and whispered something that only the cameras captured. "I remember the day. I just didn't know it mattered this much." Awa then hugged him like a mother, embracing her son. In that moment, all distinctions of politics, fame, or ceremony vanished, leaving only pure humanity. But the surge of emotion was far from over. Outside the arena, something truly massive was beginning to unfold. Traffic came to a complete halt, not due to an accident, but because thousands of people, Men, women, and children were quietly walking towards the venue. No one had instructed them to come. They had simply heard about what was happening inside. The president sitting on the bench, his speech, and the reveal of the cloth. The story spread rapidly through phones, radios, and even loudspeakers in nearby markets. They came, some carrying candles, others flowers, and many with nothing but their bare feet inside. President Traoré stepped out for some fresh air. What he saw momentarily took his breath away. The street was completely full, yet no one was shouting. They simply stood with their hands over their hearts, as if expressing silent gratitude. A small boy, perhaps 8 years old, ran forward. He wasn't carrying a flag or a sign, but his school report card. He told the president, "I want to give this to you, President, because you're the reason I'm still in school." Traoré knelt down, gently took the report card, and hugged the boy. Cameras captured every detail, and within an hour, global media outlets picked up the story, reporting on how Burkina Faso's president turns event into human moment and proclaiming, "This is what leadership looks like." However, what the president was about to do next was beyond anyone's imagination. Inside the arena, as the crowd slowly recovered from their tears, a commotion came from the back. It was the young security guard who had mistakenly stopped President Ibrahim Traoré at the gate. He looked terrified, his eyes red and hands trembling. The other guards tried to stop him, but Traoré noticed and waved them away. The young man slowly walked down the aisle, past ministers, generals, and elders, and then fell to his knees before the president. He cried, "I didn't know. I didn't recognize you. I was only trying to do my job." Traoré remained silent, and the entire room held its breath. Then, the president walked up, knelt beside the guard, and gently helped him to stand. He softly said, "You are doing exactly what this country needs. You followed your duty, even when you were unsure." The guard broke down completely, crying. In the president's arms, in that extraordinary moment, all the soldiers standing around the arena began to clap. They were not just clapping for Traoré, but for the powerful idea that no one, no matter their title, is above being held accountable. Here is the rephrased final part of your story. The internet once again buzzed with excitement. However, no one knew that President Traoré had one last personal reason for being at this event, a reason he had kept secret. When the program continued, organizers invited him to the stage, but as he approached, he politely refused the golden chair meant for him. Instead, he walked to the very last row, away from the cameras, and pulled up a chair next to a young disabled girl named Mariama. She and her mother had been quietly invited because Mariama had written a viral letter months earlier asking, "President Traoré, will you ever sit next to someone like me?" She had never received a reply, but now, as the president sat beside her, gently holding her hand, his answer was unmistakable. The hall fell quiet again, and tears started to flow. Then something even more profound occurred. Traoré asked for the microphone, and with everyone's attention on him, he declared, "This chair was never meant to be mine alone. It belongs to every Burkinabe child who dreams, every mother who struggles, every father who falls but stands again. That's who built this country. I'm just sitting among them today." Even the journalists lowered their cameras. This moment was not for headlines. It was for healing. Yet, as powerful as the moment was, nothing would compare to what unfolded the following morning, before sunrise, without any press or large group, and with only the simple vehicles. Ibrahim Traoré did something unexpected. He visited a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Only a few old, often nameless grave markers stood there. He walked to a specific one, simple and unpainted, Dan knelt. This was not just any grave. It belonged to his best friend, a young soldier named Adam Akulaba, who had died years ago saving Traoré during a rebel ambush. Traoré had never publicly spoken about him, but that morning, alone with a small flower in hand, he whispered, "Everything I do to honor your sacrifice." He sat there for 30 minutes, silently remembering. Soon, a child from a nearby village recognized him, and dozens more, barefoot, quietly came to watch from behind trees. He turned, smiled, and waved them over. Right there in the dust, he began drawing in the sand with the children. A president, in silence, drawing stars and flags with kids. That photograph would later become the image of the year. Unbeknownst to anyone, he was preparing for one final speech that would shake the entire world. Just hours away by afternoon, the news had spread incredibly fast. The president had knelt in a cemetery, sat with a disabled girl, and hugged a security guard. Social media was buzzing, with every post concluding similar, "Who leads like this anymore?" While the nation was still processing these events, Traoré made a quiet phone call to the event organizers. He had one final request: not to speak from the podium or take part in the closing anthem. Instead, he asked to walk through the crowd, unguarded for 1 hour, and allow people to simply tell their stories. He said there should be no speeches, only that the real heroes should speak. The team was unsure if this was wise or safe, but they agreed. Just before sunset, Traoré walked down the center aisle. He wore no jacket and carried no microphone, only a chair in his hand. He placed it in the middle of the crowd and sat down. He then pointed to the first person he saw, a retired farmer, and whispered, "Tell us what you survived." The old man stood, his hands trembling, and began to speak. One by one, others rose: women, widows, veterans, street boys, each sharing a story that brought the crowd to tears. But it was the final story that would deeply move President Traoré. A small, trembling voice came from the far right. It belonged to a girl, no older than 9, who was thin, barefoot, and held a folded piece of cloth. Everyone watched as she slowly walked towards President Traoré. When she stood before him, she unfolded the cloth to reveal a dusty, torn photograph. It showed her father, a fallen soldier, standing beside Traoré years ago during a mission in the north. She whispered, "My papa said you saved him once, but he didn't make it home the second time." The crowd fell silent and tears quietly streamed down faces. Traoré stared at the photo, appearing frozen. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn prayer bead, the same one her father used to carry. He gently said, "I've kept this since the day he died in my arms. I never forgot." Then, with both hands, he returned it to the little girl. She held it to her chest and collapsed in tears. In that moment, no words were necessary. That image went viral within minutes. But what the cameras didn't capture was that Ibrahim Traoré was also crying. He was not there just as a president, but as a brother, a soldier, and a man who remembered every detail. After the moving stories, as night began to fall, most people thought the day's events were over. But President Traoré stood up once more and made an unexpected announcement. He declared that the next morning he would walk across the city without cars or soldiers, just himself and anyone who wished to join him. The organizers tried to advise against this, saying it was too risky and disorganized. However, Traoré simply stated, "Let the people lead. I will follow." So, the next morning, as the sun rose over Ouagadougou, thousands filled the streets. They gathered not for protest or politics, but to walk with a man who had shown his true heart. Mothers held their children, old men carried flags, and people from all walks of life, farmers, teachers, nurses, and even the security guard from the first day all came. This became known as the silent march of the people. They walked through markets, past schools, hospitals, and cemeteries. Along the way, Traoré shook every hand he could. When they reached their final destination, he turned and said, "You don't need to raise your voices to be heard. Walk in truth and the world will follow." What Traoré didn't know was that someone from outside the country had been secretly observing the entire week's events and was preparing to share their perspective. Unknown to the people of Burkina Faso, a young journalist from Senegal, Mariam Dove, had arrived days earlier to cover the ceremony for an African news outlet. However, what she witnessed went far beyond mere headlines. She had filmed every moment. Traoré being stopped at the gate, his quiet kindness to the bewildered guard, his interaction with the disabled girl, and his walk through the city, every gesture and every tear. She had uploaded clips daily to her private channel after the silent march. Her latest post declared, "I came to report on a leader. I found a father to the broken, a listener to the poor, and a heart the world forgot existed." The video became an overnight sensation, shared by millions across Africa. Then came a surprise invitation from the African Union, asking Traoré to speak not about economics or politics, but about leading with heart. Traoré simply replied, "Let me first finish. Walking with my people." This showed that even with global attention, his focus remained on his own country and its people. The crowd eagerly awaited his next action. On the final day of the event, everyone expected a grand presidential speech. Flags were raised, the stage was decorated, and global media had arrived. But when President Ibrahim Traoré finally stood on stage, he said nothing. Instead, he invited 5 ordinary citizens to join him: the widow, the teacher, the street boy, the disabled girl, and the farmer from earlier in the week. One by one, these individuals spoke in his place, and the world watched in amazement. Their stories contained no political slogans or planned applause lines, only truth, pain, hope, and honor. When it was his turn to speak, he looked at the crowd and said, "This country has enough of my voice. It's time we listen to yours. I am not here to be celebrated. I'm here to serve." He then stepped back. The entire venue fell silent, and then, suddenly, applause erupted loud, endless, and deeply emotional. People cried openly, many even dropping their phones to clap more intensely. That moment became known online as the speech that changed nothing and everything. But the week's greatest surprise was yet to come, because immediately after the applause, he disappeared from the stage. Traoré did not stay for interviews or pose for photos with important guests. He simply walked away alone into the crowd. People called out to him, but he just waved, smiling. Later, a young boy from the village claimed he saw the president helping an old woman push a wheelbarrow near the back gate. That image of president in the dust, pushing a wheelbarrow, was captured by a teenager using a blurry phone camera. It quickly became the most shared photo in West Africa that year. Beneath it, someone wrote, "Leadership is not a crown. It's a cloth you use to wipe the tears of your people." And that is how the week concluded. There were no scandals or dramatic events, just one quiet man who demonstrated that the most powerful kind of leadership is silent compassion. From that day forward, even those who had previously doubted him began to say, "That's my president."